Hey y'all, well, back for some more KT120 drama, and I think I figured out what's going on. And of course, at first I was like, there's something wrong with the amp design, and beat my head against the wall on that. And then I kind of convinced myself that that's not what's going on. There's something wrong with these tubes. So I got on eBay, and like some of y'all suggested, buy some tubes from Upscale Audio. They're like the premium, sorted out. You're going to get some good ones. And unfortunately, and I don't blame them with a short supply, that they're only selling them to folks that have bought their amplifiers. And it actually would be wrong for them to sell folks an amplifier and then tell them, hey, you know what? We sold the tubes we had to just other random people, and good luck. I mean, that would be really crappy service. And so I understand why they're not selling them right now to anyone except their amp customers. But I got on eBay, and some guy was selling some lightly used KT120 tubes from about 5 or 6 years ago, probably pre-COVID, and definitely pre the Ukraine war, that were Upscale Audio sorted tubes. And so I decided to give a pair of those a shot. And those work. So it's not the amplifier. There's nothing wrong with the design or the screen current, or there was all these comments about, you got to run in pentode mode with a regulated screen at half that voltage, and you can't run them in ultralinear, and you can't use them except in a push-pull amp, what other people were saying, and that's all BS. I was able to bias this pair up to 55 watts of dissipation with no sign of distress, not even a hint of red plating, just like they should be able to. And honestly, I'm not going to run them there. I mean, these tubes are too nice to just blast like that, and I don't need that last couple of watts anyway. And I did some listening tests, and guys, these amps sound so amazing. Like, I guess I never had heard an amp that has this kind of a bass punch. I mean, it sounds like the drum kit's in the room. And, okay, 300B amp sounds nice, and, for certain kinds of music, it may still sound better. I don't know how, but, it might. I still got to play with that. But for rock kind of music, or even like hollow body guitar, like Kenny Burrell and that kind of stuff, these things are mind-blowing how good they sound. And I did some testing, and like at 70 milliamps at 500 volts, they're still a little thin. 80 milliamps, full song. I mean, they're rocking and rolling. And from 80 milliamps to 110, I couldn't hear any real tonal sonic difference. They just had a little more volume. And it's, at this level, you're talking, a few decibels louder, which is barely audible. But if you can get a pair of these tubes to bias at 80 milliamps in this build, you're going to have something fantastic. So anyway, let's get back to the tubes. I figured out what's wrong with the ones that won't bias up and that are overheating. And that's basically what they're doing, is they're overheating. And they're overheating because some of the tubes, when they put them together, they weld the little getter saucer, the thing that holds that material that then, when they put like this, I don't know if you know how tubes are made, but when they're done with them, they're these little saucer-like things, these little circular halo-looking things that are held up with a little piece of wire, and they get this inductive heater, which is like this big coil magnet kind of thing that just heats up the inside super hot, and it makes that material in that little saucer splatter out up against the glass, and that's what creates the getter. And the getter, from my understanding, kind of absorbs whatever kind of impurities that are left inside the tube after they vacuum it down as far as they can to get as pure a vacuum as they can so the tube can operate. Without the getter, the tube won't work. So the getter is like in absorbing or getting the last little bit of vacuum in the tube. And for some reason, on the KT120s, they have a top getter, and they also blow some getter material on the sides. Well, some of the tubes, they center that little saucer over the plate so that when the getter material gets sprayed out, it makes a big circle of that shiny stuff directly over the plate. And you have to understand, too, in a beam power tube, the whole metal part on the outside, it doesn't get hot. There's some beam forming plates in there that aim the electrons at 2 points on the plate 180 degrees apart from each other. And it's where the seams of that metal structure on the inside come together and kind of stick out. And then like on a KT120, and some other tubes, they have little fin looking things on them, and the ends of them with the seam might come up to a little T shape to try to dissipate heat. Well, in the tubes that are overheating, that shiny silver part is directly over where the main heat is radiating out of the tube. And I'm guessing that getter stuff is reflecting the heat right back on the plate instead of out of the tube, and that's what's making them red plate. The tubes that I got that'll bias up without the insides glowing red, that getter stuff in the little saucer is moved around off to the side, and that silver stuff is sprayed away from the end of the plate or the seam. So when you're looking at the tube, you can visually see the whole side of the plate, and that heat can radiate out through the glass. And so let me show you on some tubes what I'm talking about and what that looks like and why this is a problem. Okay, let me see if I can show you what I'm talking about here with the plates on these beam power tubes. So if you look at the tube from this direction with these slots here, that is not the actual plate, or that is not where the electrons hit the plate. There's beam forming plates in there that make the electrons flow like this way and this way. They're 180 degrees apart from each other. So when you run too much current through a beam power tube, this part with the holes in it isn't the part that gets hot. This side here is what gets hot. And on a KT88 tube, they have this little kind of finned piece of metal that comes up off of it to help dissipate the heat off of the plate. And the only way that it can get the heat out from inside the glass envelope is radiating it through the glass. And on most KT88 tubes, the getter's at the top, and it's kind of hard to see, but if you look inside, you'll see those two little circle things there. Those are the saucers that hold the getter material. And on a KT88, they use an inductive heater. It heats up that getter material super hot, and it like splatters all over the inside of the glass. And that's what creates this chrome looking finish, which is what the getter is, and it absorbs any air or oxygen or other bad stuff that might be inside the tube, and what creates the vacuum so that the tube can operate. So here's our KT120 tube, and as you can see, it's a side getter tube. The getter's right here, but when you rotate the tube around, you can see the plate right here. That's where the two halves are put together, or the seam, and that's where the heat is. And this is one of the tubes that had no problem biasing up to its rated current. You can see the little saucer thing is tagged there, and then it's pulled over to the side here so that the getter splashes over here to the side of the plate, and you can directly see the plate, so the heat will be able to radiate out of the side of the tube. And if you look at the other side, you can kind of see the little saucer thing there. And again, the getter is splashed to the side of this center line so that the main surface area of the plate can radiate heat out through the side of the tube. So let's take a look at the other one that has no problem biasing up. Same thing. You can see the plate, you can see the seam of the plate, which is where most of the heat is going to be radiating out from. Same thing on the other side. Here's the getter. But then when you rotate the tube around, you can see the seam, and at least 80% of the plate is visible through the side of the tube. Now let's take a look at the tubes that will not bias up to the rated current and are overheating. What do you see when you look in the side? You're not seeing the plate. For some reason, the little saucer thing is centered on this plate seam, and then when the getter material flashes onto the side of the tube, it's blocking the heat from coming out of the tube. And I believe that's why these are overheating and red plating when you try to bias them up, is because the heat coming off of the plate is reflecting off of the getter and is trapped inside the tube. And to even see them red plating, you have to kind of look through at an angle like this, and you'll see the seam getting super hot. And the other side's the same way. All four of these tubes that I have that are overheating and they won't bias up have the same thing. They've got the saucer turned 90 degrees from what the earlier ones were done. And on the earlier ones, instead of the getter being like right here, it would be like here. And I don't know if they just changed their production, or if this is the way the batches of them were coming in, and people like Upscale Audio would just like go through a batch of tubes, and all of these that had the getters like off to the side, like this one does, like here's the difference in the two of them. And to me, it's super obvious. You can just visually see the whole seam on this one, which is where most of the heat comes from. And on this one, the seam's behind the getter. And so I have a feeling they would get like, 100 of these tubes, and somebody would just visibly look at them, and all of these that had the getter on top of the seam, they just put them in the reject pile. And then they test these, because they know these are going to overheat. And I think we're at the point where these ones that are centered over the plate are the only tubes that are left, and those are the ones that are being shipped out. The KT150s that I got, same deal. The getter was directly over the plate. They were not like this earlier version of the tube that had the getter off to one side and the plate was able to radiate the heat out of the tube. I've got no way of knowing for sure, but that's the only thing that makes sense to me. There may be some other internal construction things that are also a problem, but these two tubes, rock and roll, they bias up higher than the KT150s that I was sent did. And these are rated 10 watts less. So, got a pair of tubes I can use. So, let's wrap this up here. So you folks that are visual learners like I am, I hope showing you what I'm talking about makes sense. And I know I'm onto something here because a viewer sent me a pair of tubes that he got from another source, not Upscale Audio, and one of them, the getter is directly over the plate, and on the other tube, it's shifted a little bit to the side, but not as far to the side as the good tubes I have. And the other thing I've noted is the getters on the side, they aren't all the same size. Some of them, the spots are, fairly small, and then some of them are really big. Well, the tubes he sent me both have these really big circles of that silver getter material. But like I said, one of them is directly over the plates. It started red plating at 80 milliamps. The other one, a bigger getter than my good tubes, but is shifted off to one side a little bit. Not as much as my good tubes, but you can see more of the plate, looking through the glass. It made it to 95 milliamps before it started showing some signs of red plating. So, I may be wrong here. And somebody's probably going to, say in the comments, I've got some with giant getters that are directly over the plates, and you can buy some at 120 milliamps, they're fine. So, I may be wrong here. But from the sample size of tubes that I've played with, that's what I'm seeing, and that makes sense to me. I mean, when I first looked at these tubes, I thought, why in the world did they get the getter right there? Why didn't they put it like on the other two sides where there's no heat? And don't know. Have no idea why they did that. Maybe somebody from Tung Sol is watching this and will say, maybe we should move the saucers over there and get the getter away from where all the heat is. And I have a feeling when folks like Upscale Audio, when they get, 500 of these tubes, the first thing they go through is just visually sort them. And the ones that got the getter right over the seam on the plate, those are going in the reject pile because they know those are going to overheat. And then they test the ones like that I got that have the getter off to the side where the tubes aren't going to overheat, and then, cull them from there and match them up from that point. And, you guys that have watched me a long time know I'm an analogy person, but it would almost be like a car manufacturer going, hey, why don't we put the big piece of sheet metal right in front of the radiator? Because that's basically what they've done. And of course the tube's going to overheat. And I guess if you're mostly using them in push-pull amps and they're biased, not even anywhere near their maximum, with their idle current, that it's not going to be a problem. And, I am saving that other pair of KT120 tubes for, you guessed it, we're going to put them in the R8. And I know the heater current is probably too high. These things, the power transformer already runs pretty hot. So I'm going to put a separate tube filament transformer inside the amp to power the output tubes. And you're going to see what this thing sounds like with a set of KT120 tubes in it. If it sounds anything like these monoblocks, it's definitely going to take this amp to the next level. But anyway, I hope that clears up this saga of the KT120 tubes, and that you guys that have been either collecting parts or drooling over these KT120 monoblocks, build them, guys. I mean, if you can find a pair of these tubes that aren't like scary overheating at 80 milliamps at the 500 volts, they're going to sound just mind-blowingly good. I mean, I built that Blue Glow KT88, and it's not even the same sport how much better these sound. And people have asked me, I can't really get those Thermionic Labs. It's going to be a lot of shipping. Can I use Hammond ones? No. If you don't use the same output transformers that I used in this build, all bets are off what it's going to sound like. And I can't imagine that some generic Edcore or, these other, kind of lower tier output transformers are going to sound anything like those Thermionic Labs transformers that I'm using are. And I'm going to be buying more of them. I actually may talk to them about, do they have some output transformers that I can put in my R8? But that's for a later date. So anyway, hope you're enjoying this content. Hope you're enjoying the channel. Thanks for all you people that have maybe new to the channel watching this content. Hope you're having fun. We are going to do some interesting stuff with the R8. And a quick spoiler, this second version sounds so much better out of the box than that first one did. It's definitely at least on par with the MusaShare X7 now, which before I was telling people, don't get this, go get the MusaShare. I think the R8's the right one to get now that they fixed these problems. And it's silent once you put some decent tubes in it. So anyway, again, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Thanks to you Patreon folks. Thanks to you folks that make donations. That helps me afford to do this stuff and bring good content to you. And until the next video, have a nice day.